Chapter 15. Travel Plans. Nancy's announcement about the trip to Turkey came as a complete surprise. Bess and George stared at her, speechless. Nancy grinned at them. "I mean it! And it would be great if Ned and Burt and Dave could go too. And also Aisha. I have the itinerary." George was the first to recover from her surprise. She exclaimed, "Don't tell me you found the mannequin!" "No, but I did learn this. There's a big secret connected with the mannequin. Aisha knows where she is, but she says Farouk made her promise not to tell it." Bess frowned. "I'm all mixed up over this whole thing. Please, somebody straighten me out. Please." "I figured," said Nancy, "that since we're sure Farouk sent the rug and he's in Istanbul and he has been declared innocent of the smuggling charge, and he and Aisha were in love, what we have to do now is to help the two of them get together. But after we all get to Istanbul, how are we going to find Farouk? It's a big city. Just walk the streets until he shows up?" George remarked. Nancy revealed the latest clue in the border of the rug. It's a special, highly decorated shoe shine stand. I believe Farouk expects Dad to show up near one of them. "I can imagine how many there must be," Bess sighed, then asked, "Do you suppose Farouk will be awfully disappointed if you don't bring the mannequin along?" Nancy shrugged, and George remarked, "If he's not planning to come back to America and wants the mannequin badly enough, he can tell us where it is and we'll ship it to him." Bess and George were enthusiastic over the idea of going to Turkey. "Where's the itinerary you mentioned?" Nancy picked it up from the table near the wing chair and handed it to the cousins. "Hypers!" George exclaimed as she gazed at the colorful pictures of mosques and caiques. Bess said, "George, let's phone our parents right now for permission." "Wait!" Nancy cried as Bess started toward the phone. She had heard her father's car pulling into the driveway. As soon as the lawyer had greeted everyone, she put her proposal to him. He looked startled, but after thinking over the matter, remarked, "It sounds like a good idea. But what about the expense? Where would all you young people find travel money?" Nancy reminded her father about Mr. Simpson, the travel agent. You recall he had arranged an inexpensive trip for a group to Turkey. Perhaps we could take advantage of the low plane fare without going on the rest of his tour. As she spoke, Nancy indicated the round-trip fare at the bottom of the brochure. "We could stay in Istanbul and search for Farouk." "Well," said Mr. Drew, "phone Mr. Simpson and see if he has 8 reservations left. But don't get your hopes too high." Nancy invited Bess and George to stay to dinner, then hurried off to make the call. The travel agency's line was busy. She sat waiting, tapping her fingers on the telephone table. She tried again. Still no luck. "Somebody must be arranging a trip around the world," she thought. This time she waited a little longer and was successful in reaching him. "Nancy Drew, how are you?" he asked. "All the Simpsons are fine, including little Tommy. He calls you his water wheel lady." Nancy chuckled. "I'm glad he hasn't forgotten me. Mr. Simpson, thank you for the itinerary of your tour to Turkey. By any chance, do you have 8 places left? If so, could my dad and I and 6 friends just make the trip to and from Istanbul without taking the whole tour of Turkey?" "Let me take a look," Mr. Simpson replied. He left the phone to consult his chart, but soon returned. "I have good news for you, Nancy," he said. 2 people have just canceled, and that makes exactly 8 seats available. You know, of course, we leave in 2 days. Do you have all passports and vaccinations?" "Yes," Nancy replied. "I haven't asked all my friends yet, but I'm sure they'll be able to make it. May I let you know tomorrow?" "That will be fine." When Nancy came back into the living room with the good news, Bess and George each gave a "yeah!" and Bess hurried to call her parents. She returned in a moment, saying she had their consent to make the trip. Then George phoned the Fane house and received her parents' permission. At that moment, Hannah Gruen came into the living room and was told about the exciting plan. I'm glad, she said. Now Nancy and Mr. Drew can get away from people who break into houses and leave scimitars and throw rocks at cars. And don't worry, Hannah, put in Mr. Drew. I'll see that Chief McGinnis sends a patrol car out here regularly to make sure everything stays peaceful while we're gone. Now that's not necessary, she said, then went on. I came to tell you that dinner is ready, and since we're having steak, you'd better come to the table at once. Mr. Drew chuckled. I'll be with you in a jiffy. He hurried off, but was back in 3 minutes. Then they all went to the dining room. As soon as dinner was over, Nancy went to the telephone. The first one she called was Aisha. When Nancy mentioned the trip, the Turkish girl gave a little cry of happiness. Then she said she was not quite sure. I'm thrilled, but I am a little fearful of meeting Farouk. Once you see each other, I'm sure everything will be wonderful, said Nancy. Aisha, could you go for a drive with me tomorrow morning? There are several things I'd like to discuss with you. One of them concerns arrangements for us to stay in places that would not be expensive. I'm sure my parents can find something, Aisha replied, and I'll be very happy to meet you tomorrow morning. What time? 10 o'clock. By then I should know how many of us can go. Sure that Ned would say yes, she put in a call to his home. She hoped he had made the insurance sale that afternoon. It would help pay for the trip. Ned answered. Hello? Hi, said Nancy. Ned, do you still want to be my bodyguard? Nancy, you mean in Istanbul? Yes. Could you go in 2 days? Wow, let me get my breath. You mean it? Upon hearing it was a bona fide trip, he laughed. You bet I'll go. Wouldn't miss it for anything. I sold a big enough policy today to pay all my expenses. Good for you, said Nancy. Bess was the next one to come to the phone and tried several places to find Dave. She finally left word at his home for him to call her at Nancy's. George had no better luck locating Burt. It was not until the following morning that both boys phoned Nancy's house and heard of the exciting trip. Shortly before 10 o'clock, they called back to say they would be able to accompany the group. Sounds cool, said Dave. I think I'll pretend to be a sultan, and you girls are some of my slaves. Nancy laughed and replied, You just try it, and I'll cover your whole head with my Turkish veil. Quickly, Nancy dialed Mr. Simpson's travel agency to confirm the number of plane reservations. Then she hurried off in her car to meet Aisha. The two girls spent a very pleasant hour together, and Aisha said she would arrange for the whole group to have good accommodations in Istanbul. I will cable my parents as soon as I get home. As the Turkish girl was about to step out of the convertible, she impulsively gave Nancy a tight squeeze. You're the most wonderful detective in the world, she said. Nancy smiled and kissed her new friend. Then she drove off. I think I'll stop at Mr. Anthony's tailor shop and see if Ha-Ha is there. Maybe I can get him to answer a few questions. I'm sure that funny old fellow knows more than he's telling. Fortunately, he was there, perched as usual on a bench in the corner of the shop. As soon as he saw Nancy, Ha-Ha began to laugh on a crescendo note that resembled a shriek. It sent chills up and down the girl's spine. Finally, he stopped laughing and said, You keep coming back here, miss. You think that mannequin's hiding somewhere around this place? Maybe. If you see her, let me know, Nancy replied. Then she walked over to the man and looked straight at him. On a sudden hunch, she asked, What I want to know is, who is the man you're giving information to about me? For once, Ha-Ha did not laugh. His eyes shifted nervously. The young detective was sure she had hit upon the truth. Finally, he said, How'd you find out? I didn't think it would hurt. Nancy was thrilled that he had fallen into her trap. Still looking stern, she said, It matters a great deal. Now tell me, who is he? The wizened old man wilted. He looked all around, then whispered, He's a cousin of Tune Eric. Pretty near his double, I'd say. He's from Istanbul. Ha-Ha's lighter side returned. He gave a low chuckle. All this time you thought Tunay Eric was the burglar, when really it was his cousin. They've got an interesting grapevine, Nancy said to herself. Tunay told his cousin about our encounter at the carpet factory. The cousin, in turn, told Ha-Ha. Realizing the old man knew even more than she had suspected, Nancy asked him why Eric's cousin wanted the rug. He found out Farouk sent the rug to your father and thought that valuable jewels were sewn into it. He went right over to your house and tried to steal it. Nancy was elated with the information. She said, "When the burglar found out there weren't any jewels in the rug, he became furious. He left me a scimitar as a souvenir. Do you know why?" Ha-Ha's jaw sagged and his eyes bulged. He was the very picture of a terrified man. Finally he spoke. "I'll show you something," he said. He put one hand inside his coat. Suddenly it occurred to Nancy that he might be reaching for a weapon. End of chapter 15.